I'm going to go through and introduce each of our panelists. As I do, I'm going to ask them to just spend a couple of moments, maybe a minute each, talking a little bit about their businesses and a little bit about their employees, sort of the employment base that they have in their businesses, and then we're going to get into the heart of our discussion. Welcome to Patrice Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just wanted to say that I love being in Santa Barbara. Anthony and I were just talking, and he is my daughter's temporary employer. So we're in a community where it's 3 degrees from whoever it is that you're sitting next to, right?
That's true.
So at any rate, Cottage Health is immensely grateful to the community for the support that the community has provided to us. As Ken indicated, we have 3 hospitals that comprise our health system, one in San Ynez, one in Goleta Valley, and the flagship hospital in Santa Barbara. We also have a reference lab, Pacific Diagnostic Laboratories in Goleta. And we have a full spectrum of health services. Some of you may have seen recently, we have embarked on the journey of population health. And so it's been very interesting for us to be an employer and also a provider in the community and seeing the impact of housing not only on our workforce, but also on our patients. And so it's kind of an interesting study that we're learning more about. We have about 3,700 employees at Cottage Health, and I have to say that when I first assumed my role in 2001, I had absolutely no idea or background in housing, and I must say it's been quite a journey. I remember when I first started, I thought, housing? Come on, I'll get done with this in 30 days. So fast forward 16 years, it's still a journey, and I've learned a lot from living in the community, networking, and trying to identify means in which we as employers and community members can help each other to create workforce housing for our critical workforce. One of the issues that we are always concerned about is accessibility to our facilities by our workforce, particularly as it pertains to emergency situations. You may recall the La Conchita landslide. And during that time, we have about 25% of our population that live either to the north or the south. So accessing the facility was tremendously difficult, and we needed to be able to have that workforce able to relieve the next shift of employees. Obviously, health is a 24/7 business. On the other end of the spectrum, when we're looking at population health, and that is helping our community become healthier, we realize that there are social determinants of health. And one of them is housing. If someone's concerned about their housing, their food, they cannot, and some other factors, it's hard for them to take care of their own health. So all of these things drive our healthcare costs up. So we want to link arms and learn as much as we can to improve that for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice. Next is Dave Clark. Dave is the president of Impulse Communications, where he has been since April in 2006. He had been the GM of one of 2 internet companies that had merged back in 1997, so he's been with sort of this combined company for quite a while. He has a BA in psychology from UCSB and is involved in a number of local nonprofits, including the Goleta Valley Chamber. Please join me in welcoming Dave.
Thanks, Ken. So yeah, I run Impulse Communications. We help businesses manage cloud communications. We've got customers all over the country and in some cases sites around the world. The bulk of our business, based on our heritage and being in this area so long, most of our business is here. And so we are, I've been doing business here for 20 years, running an operation. Another interesting sidebar of my experience is I'm one of those housing challenged people. So me and my wife got married in 2001 and looked around Goleta, said we want to buy a house, and housing prices were a little out of reach. We went up to the valley and looked at houses up in Buellton, and then wound up buying up there. And so to this day, we're still up there. We've sold that house and moved into something else. But we live a split life between the San Ynez Valley and Santa Barbara. And it's an interesting experience. It works for us, but it's got a lot of challenges.
Thank you, sir. And of course, our returning champion, we're pleased to have Matthew Fienup, who was our keynote speaker this morning. Matthew's here to tell us how all this relates to Ventura County. No, wait. He's here to provide our economic perspective on everything that we're going to be discussing today. Matthew, thank you for coming back. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And beyond, I feel like in the company of this group, I can do little more than represent the detached from reality Ivy Tower view of issues, being the token academic up here. So I hope to hear a lot and learn a lot from the three of you.
Well, I will say the one thing that Matthew and I do have in common is we both actually are from Ventura County because like Dave driving from the north, I drive up from the south every day. So I get to experience that as well. So there was a number of questions that we had shared with you ahead of time. Let's start with sort of the baseline. Talk about how housing prices and housing scarcity, especially here on the South Coast, have affected your businesses and particularly your ability to retain or recruit in new employees. And maybe Anthony, we'll start with you.
Definitely. So with managing a contingent workforce, it creates quite a bit of challenges, right? Because I'm working with not just professionals, we're also working with lower socioeconomic groups that have their own challenges, right? When you're making minimum wage to $12 an hour. So it's true what the numbers are saying. It's 35 to 45% of our community is commuter traffic. So when we're dealing with the lower socioeconomic groups that I work with, my manufacturing clients per se, or light industrial warehouse, direct relief, for instance, getting those candidates out to market has become more and more challenging just because we do not have adequate housing to keep and retain them. So turnover has become quite an issue, and it's become really costly to companies. As far as reducing that and creating more opportunities for people to stay, it's not really looking good, to be quite honest with you. Cost of housing, as you have seen, has skyrocketed just because we have a lot of people with a lot of money and capital in Santa Barbara that have bought up a lot of the property, and I guess you could say the apartment buildings, condos, certain one bedrooms that are increasingly getting more and more expensive. So retaining talent has become extremely hard just because Santa Barbara is a very expensive place to live.
We'll go on to you, Patrice, and I think part of what we also want to hear from you is most of us then are familiar with, I think, the major investment that the hospital made in trying to address this issue, so maybe you can sort of include that in your comments.
Sure. All right, so Cottage obviously employs a lot of people. We have over 900 categories of jobs. And so that's anywhere from, we are a city, I guess, is how I would explain our organization. We have everything from security officers, environmental service workers, to physicians, nurses, respiratory care technicians, clinical lab scientists. So the effect of housing really spans that spectrum. Everyone is affected by it. Those that are lucky enough to have a home tend to stay in the community. We just celebrated last night, we had our Employee Service Awards, and we had a service award for an individual who has a home and celebrated her 50th year with us. And we had 5 people that celebrated their 45th year of service, and it wasn't their first job. And so I believe what happens in this area is individuals who are fortunate enough to have a home tend to work longer. We're seeing the workforce stay longer in employment. And that's a wonderful thing at times. And then there are times when the individual feels that they can no longer maintain and keep up, and it makes it very difficult from an employment perspective. I know you all have experienced that, in having to have that person come to the conclusion that they need to seek out another way of making a living, because now they're concerned about their housing costs. In terms of retention of staff, what happens, and you all have been there. So we have the new graduate nurse who's on fire, very excited. And what does she or he want? Rental, right? So they come into the community and they see the prices and their jaw drops, because some of those individuals come from areas outside of this area. Los Angeles, for example, where rents are less expensive. And they say, I don't care, I want to work here. Cottage is where I'd really like to work. They love working at Cottage. Then they meet the person of their dreams, right? They get married, and then they start a family. And no longer does that rental unit allow them to live the life that they always dreamed of. So now they're going to look for home ownership, but they can't get in. So then they start looking at Buellton or down to Ventura. And what happens? Then they leave. And so the cost of turnover is very expensive. If you haven't, I'm sure that you unfortunately had a meeting this morning, sorry, Mr. Talk. But turnover equates to about a 1 times annual salary. So that's a very expensive cost to an organization. Again, driving up the cost. But it's just about the community and the benefits to the community. So Cottage implemented some tactics to try to make it easier for individuals. We have a full complement of commuter benefits. We have subsidies that we provide. We've been very fortunate to be able to do that. We also had a project that was approved by the city and supported, and it is called Bella Riviera. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that project, but we found it to be very successful. We now have 81 of our workforce, our critical workforce, right in our community, because those homes we follow the city's guidelines for affordability. And so those homes could be valued in the $1 million bracket, but because of that individual's household income, they qualify for significantly less of a mortgage. So that's worked out quite well. And now we're wondering, should we do it again? And hence the coming today to try to find out what are the incentives that could be provided. So the impact to us really is getting our critical workforce here.
That's great. Thanks, Patrice.
We're kind of echoing the same things. To be very straightforward, the single biggest business issue for anybody doing business on the Central Coast, I think, with any sizable group of employers, is housing. So we all have, within our industry segments and things like that, other challenges, but the universal one is the cost of housing. It reduces the employment pool and has an impact on our ability to grow and thrive as businesses. We fight through. It's a great place to live. So for us, recruiting outside the area is it's a no-go. So if I get a resume from anywhere that's outside of Santa Barbara, unless it's got a letter attached to it that says, my spouse has a job at X company or UCSB, and I need to find a job in Santa Barbara, then they'll come out of the discard pile. Beyond that, it's not happening. Now, LA has, the prices down there have crept up a lot, so we're starting to get a little bit of ability to recruit from Southern California more than in the past. But the reality is it's just not an option for us. And then just the general availability of candidates is a big problem, and that's related mostly to housing. The second challenge is retention over time. So retention of employees. Our senior management team, our average tenure is 13 years. The next tier is probably 6 years on average. And then the rest of the company, so 70% of the employees, you wind up with probably a 2 to 3 year retention before something comes along and they have to move. So if you're making over 100 grand and you're hanging out with somebody or married to somebody that's making over 100 grand, you're gonna do okay. If you're making 50 to 80 grand, you're gonna be okay for a period of time until you meet that person, you start thinking about a family, they're in that same income bracket, you're gonna start looking around, and then it's a challenge. And it isn't, unfortunately, the interesting thing for me over the last couple of years is it used to be, okay, do I have to commute from, Buellton or Lompoc or something like that? The last 2 years, we've lost people to New Mexico, somebody was going to go to Texas. So it's gone from just, hey, I got to work a little bit harder to stay here, to like, you know what, I'm out. So it continues to be a challenge for us.
Now, you did let the person know about Texas that the problem was they had to actually go and live in Texas, right? They got that part?
I always say, look, I'll hold your spot for you for a while.
There you
but
go. Once you realize the mistake you've made.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, as you sort of talk with folks that you do on a daily basis, are there other issues you've heard, other impacts out there, or other thoughts you have on the question?
Well, one of the things I wanted to sort of introduce to the conversation, because it just hasn't come up yet today, is I wanted to just talk briefly as a higher educator. So as a college professor, I teach exclusively graduate courses in economics. And this is, we're told, the new economy, is one that puts a premium on quantitative skills, among other skills. And so California Lutheran University, a regional university with deep roots in the local community, is turning out skilled labor. And unfortunately, because of the cost and availability of workforce housing and the effect that it has on the ability of local businesses to attract and retain talent, and the effect that that has on the downsizing and defection of businesses we see in our community, the story for California Lutheran University that's sometimes sad is that we're really training another community's skilled labor. And again, we do that. We love what we do, and we love impacting these young people's lives. But they're no longer graduating into a community that actually has a place for them.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately here in Santa Barbara, we've been experiencing that for a while too, both with UCSB and City College and others as well. So that's a good point. Let's switch over to, we talked about the impacts that businesses have when it comes to employees. Let's talk about sort of core issues for the business itself. And maybe Dave, we can start with you. Have you found that because of the issues that we have with a scarcity of housing and housing costs, that it has impacted your company's ability to be able to grow and expand? Or has there been any talk internally maybe about looking someplace else at any point to headquarter?
Well, so we're a services company, not a product company, and so I think it's easier for companies that make products and ship them anywhere to go anywhere, and so that's one of the traditional challenges with Santa Barbara, is that a lot of companies here that are big employers could be doing business anywhere. As a services company, it's a little bit harder, and our core customer base is here, so we really aren't going anywhere. But the challenge of how to grow outside the area using employees here, that's the real challenge. So trying to scale to any level while keeping your core workforce here in Santa Barbara is a big challenge. So we haven't specifically said, okay, we're going to cap, which we have some great employers here that have taken the philosophy of we're going to cap our workforce here and we're going to grow in Phoenix or we're going to grow in Dallas. We haven't taken those steps, but what we have done is, as technology has advanced, we have the capability now to do things with video and stuff that we didn't do before. So instead of, we have probably 5 employees right now that 10 years ago, when they said, hey, I've got to move to Seattle, I would have said, sorry to see you go, look us up if you ever come back to town. But we've taken that leap to say, okay, I'm going to use a remote employee and put a video phone on their desk, and so we're seeing each other still face to face. It's had a pretty significant impact on their ability to still be part of that core group. So that's the way we've kind of dealt with it over the last few years. But is it sustainable? It's tough. One other thing I'll add too is that's always kind of bugged me, so it's great I get to rant up here. We talk about these unemployment rates. So City of Goleta's unemployment rate, I think it's 3%. It was 3% in 2009, I think, at the bottom. Maybe it was 4% or something like that. It's not a good thing to have a 3% unemployment rate. That means there's nobody to hire.
That's right.
And everybody's got to come from out of town. And so we've been stuck in that position, and it looks great, but it's a deceptive statistic. It's a terrible statistic. Santa Barbara, I think, is 4% or something like that. That means there's nobody to hire. It doesn't mean that we're just this great economic engine. It means we can't find anybody, and we're either importing or we're just making do with what we've got, which I think a lot of businesses do.
And with Cottage, I mean, I think your sort of growth has to happen based on our health needs, and you're not exactly moving to Texas, I wouldn't think.
Right.
But I do know that on the technology side, as Dave just talked about, there's a lot of new opportunities out there.
Yeah.
Is it something Cottage is looking at rather than hiring in new employees, looking at technology as a way to save on some of these costs?
Yes. Yeah, in fact, to build on what you're saying, what Dave's saying, interestingly enough, telecommuting obviously has become an option for us. And while it is very appealing, nursing and telemedicine, I mean, telemedicine is starting to show up more and more. Don't really know what the future impact will be on the entire workforce on that, but I can tell you there are many people who would prefer to have their clinician in the room with them. And I'm not sure if anybody in the audience can relate to that. But seriously, folks, I really think that that is the wave for the future for a variety of reasons. And telecommuting is something that we are going to need to embrace unless we can overcome the crisis. We just have to figure it out. We have to figure out how we can overcome the legislation that makes it a little bit more difficult in having to ensure, you know, an appropriate workspace at someone's house. So you're overcoming the work comp potential impact of that. Are they working in a closet? Are they, you know, sort of, what are the wires? What's the safety hazards? Now it's going to become our claim, right? So we probably all had those concerns. I can tell you that that has been a technique, as you, that has worked with some satisfaction.
So Anthony, both within your company and then with all of your clients, what do you hear in this realm? Folks that either are curtailed in their ability to grow or maybe looking elsewhere just because of the issues they have with housing here?
Definitely. One particular client that stands out in mind, we've been tasked by Procore to ramp up, 100 software engineers between last quarter and 2016. So that's a huge project. And as you know, software developers are very hard to come by. So we've talked at doing telecommunicating there, but they're so big on their culture and having kind of boots on the ground and team collaboration. It's very difficult to do telecommunicating with their software development team. And we're kind of running up with scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as candidates, because like Goleta is operating on a 4% unemployment. Carpentry is even thinner. It's at 2.8. So really everyone that wants a job is employed, and even the people that maybe shouldn't have certain opportunities are getting employed in carpentry just because it's a body in a seat, right?
We're sort of recycling those people.
So what's cool about this is certain companies like Sonos, the Procore's, Cottage Hospital are always replenishing the pool of talent and keeping them fresh and dynamic. But what's keeping that very challenging is the housing, right? It's so expensive. So when we engage software developers from other parts of the world, nationally, H-1Bs, they come with, wanting the Santa Barbara dream, right? They want a home in Hope Ranch or Montecito or Lower Riviera, or even just a condo. And that becomes really challenging when we're competing with salary ranges up in the Silicon Valley or San Francisco, where we're dealing with the same pool of candidates, right? These software developers. When we only have a couple unicorn companies here in Santa Barbara, Procore being one of them. So if there was a layoff or something to happen, that's scaring folks from coming over because they can't just jump from one unicorn company to the other like we see in the Bay Area, right? With every time they jump, they get a 20 to 30% salary increase. Those opportunities really aren't here in Santa Barbara. So from the client's perspective, it's created a lot of issues where, and sometimes people taking a free vacation on us or the client just to get, enchanted by the opportunities that are here, but then coming to find out, gosh, is my family going to be able to afford this? Will my partner be able to find a second job in this community, which only has so many opportunities? Will my kids have adequate accommodations for education and different things, knowing that just the cost of living outside of housing is just very expensive. So it's created a lot of dynamic issues, and I'm finally getting headway with the decision makers at Procore and evaluating we need to establish some kind of telecommunicating, or they need to expand offices, which they are doing. So really interesting things that we're rubbing against on those kind of niche positions that I'm sure that you're seeing at your both firms too.
So Matthew, you talked this morning about a number of companies, especially some larger companies that have either partially or totally left Ventura County because of some of these issues. I know one of the things that we've talked about here locally is as we see some of these companies like Procore growing, the potential for them to look at Ventura County as a place to be able to expand into because they just literally aren't able to do that here. Are you hearing anything like that in Ventura County? Is there any spill-off benefit of sort of our economy in Santa Barbara County going down south?
Yeah, no, not at all, to be totally
well,
candid.
Never mind, okay.
And so what I would add to that, though, is that, first of all, companies will, and tell me if I'm wrong, but, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, there's a significant cost to a displacement to moving a workforce like Amgen is doing with 500 employees. And so they'll actually endure, in the case of Ventura County business, a significant increase in the cost of doing business locally, whether it be workforce housing or some other issue, up to the point that it actually is less costly to move, right? And at that point, it's hard to imagine, Ventura County offering such a significant benefit over Santa Barbara that you might sort of see that displacement. The other one I wanted to call out with Anthony's comments was this idea of clusters and pools of skilled labor. One of the things I think is important in the discussion is that it's Santa Barbara and Ventura can't necessarily afford to allow housing affordability to reach, especially low levels, versus places like Orange County and the Bay Area, right? Simply because they don't have these clusters of skilled talent, all right? So there's just no other options. A single downsizing or a single defection, impacts the regional economy on a scale that you just don't see in a place like Orange County or the Bay Area, where they have clusters of skilled talent. Actually, Amgen's they said the second major reason for relocating those 500 employees, number one was housing affordability, and very closely linked to it was the lack of a pool of skilled labor to draw on locally.
Oh, I've got one more question to get to solutions, but we are going to go out in questions from the audience. So if you do have those, get those ready, and we'll be circulating with mics here momentarily. But I want to switch over for all four of you to talk a little bit from the solutions side. If you could wave your magic wand, either for the community or for local government, what sort of things would you propose be done in order to help address some of these issues? And Patrice, we'll start with you this time.
A good question. I've been thinking about that and hearing the last session on whether to react or be proactive. I do think the community has an obligation to become educated around the subject. And I think that we, as employers, can help with that and have them understand what the implications are. I do think that there are coalitions that can be formed. Anthony and I were just talking about that. Cottage is an enviable position to be able to garner support from the community because there is a knowledge that we need to have that critical workforce. You want your nurse in your bed, on your bedside, not in your bed, excuse me. I am the Vice President of Human Resources. I did not say that.
Certainly adds a whole new thing to the talent recruitment that you do. Yes. So,
we do things. At any rate, we do want the nursing, the clinical staff in the room with our patients. And as you and I both want, we all want to have the best person when we are sick. So I do think it is a community issue, and it's not, a lot of times we look only to government, but I think we all have to link arms on this one. I do think the employer community has to band together to come up with solutions, especially I'm thinking for you, Dave, with 50 employees, and you may be with, what did you say, how many?
200 to 250.
Okay, so if we all band together and come up with child care facilities for people that have to live outside of the area but they want to have child care here, we ought to do that. If we can band together because we believe we want to have some housing for our employees that otherwise we could not build on our own, then I think we need to do that. I think we have to get it out of our silos and be able to work together.
Dave, what sort of solutions would you like to see, either community-wise or from local governments?
I think the first part of my rant on that would be, if you don't think that we have a housing problem, then you shouldn't be elected and you shouldn't be in whatever position in government that you're in. So that's the first step, and that goes to education. It's an issue. And the thing that bugs me is I grew up in LA, and everybody's like, well, we don't want to be LA or Orange County. You know why LA and Orange County are LA and Orange County the way they are? Because there's no middle class. There's no workforce in the middle. So you have very wealthy things, and next is a tenement next door, and you have all this tension and stuff that goes along with that. So if the path that we're on right now is Santa Barbara, Metro Santa Barbara becomes a retirement community and a hospitality and food service community. That's the job pools that, if the trends continue, that's where we wind up. I don't think it's going to wind up there, but we have to acknowledge that it's not going to be a great community if we don't figure out how to keep the middle class living in this area and working in this area and volunteering in this area and being part of the community. That I think is the biggest thing, is first acknowledgement and recognition that it is an issue and we do need to work together on it. And then employers, yeah, we can do more together. But it's tough. If you look at Goleta's done a lot of stuff. There's 2 employees that I have that are in the new developments up there that would have left the area, I think, in the next year or so if they didn't have a nice apartment to move into. Goleta, people that are blamed for growth in Goleta are getting crucified, and it's absolutely ridiculous. It's tough to sit and watch that when people leave the area. What do you want? Do you not want people to live here and work here? Sorry.
How do you feel, Dave?
This is why we brought Dave. We knew he'd light a fire under us all. So, Anthony, your thoughts?
Well, I couldn't agree with Dave more. I think there just needs to be a more realization of the crisis that we're really in, outside of what we're doing today. So if we can kind of keep this trend and conversation going, I think it could be really helpful. But I think strategic partnerships would be very important. Folks like the Tobes Group, other big property management organizations, partnering with companies and getting an idea of how they're ramping up and when they're ramping up, and starting maybe a retention program that maybe Cottage Hospital has. I think they have the best retention program in Santa Barbara. And as you've seen, they have more applicants than they don't know what to do with, right? And they've got the housing retention program, which keeps people loyal to the company because they want to keep onto their housing. So I think strategic partnerships, I'd love to see, if I could wave that magic wand, between people that really have these assets in town that keep driving up the market. We got to ask them, is that really healthy for the overall general culture of Santa Barbara? And it sounds like it's really not. So I think if bridging that gap of strategic partnerships, retention programs like that, just employee appreciation, and just having more conversations like this, I think will, bridge that gap, hopefully.
So, Matthew, we know that as we sort of look at the reason we are where we are, there's regulatory issues, both from sort of just areas we can't build on at all to making it difficult to build. We know that, just sort of the regular way that housing prices are going up is an issue. We live in a beautiful place. It's going to go up. There's a whole host of different things. What, from your perspective, should we be looking at as ways, especially here in Santa Barbara, to try and make some inroads and address the issue?
Well, so the thing I'm really struck by from the panelists that I've heard talk today, Renee was talking about, I think I've got it straight, AUDs, average unit density incentives. And it's amazing that you can have a program that achieved exactly the goal that it set out to, and then you're told you're being too successful. Now, I also just heard, and I love hearing that Patrice say, well, incumbent businesses need to team together and work directly on these problems, as well as speaking with a single voice to the nature of the problem. But on the flip side of that is what I would like to see is elected officials court businesses, demonstrate how important they are to the local community, and then actually roll out the red carpet, break through regulatory barriers, and figure out what does it take to support the incumbent businesses that we have here. And I would hold up as the exception that proves the rule. One of our new neighbors down where I work is the LA Rams. And an amazing thing happened when the LA Rams announced in January that they were going to be moving to the Conejo Valley. By June, the end of June, they had a world-class training facility that was built from the dirt up and ready to move into. And that's because every single regulatory barrier was knocked down. Every process was streamlined because this was a very, very sexy employer. And what I want to know is, why aren't we courting non-durable manufacturers, technology companies? Why aren't they as sexy to the community? Because the reality is they're actually going to employ more middle and upper class middle families, and they are going to be bigger engines of growth.
They probably won't leave in 20 years when they don't get a new stadium. So.
Well, the other one that's interesting, the sad footnote there, is now they can't find 80 acres of developable land to build a permanent facility on. So it's not clear how that story ends, actually. But that's sort of the model. I would actually like to see elected officials, and not just elected officials, the staff at the county and municipal level, rolling out that red carpet and actually courting incumbent businesses and saying, what can we do?
All right, well, let's turn it back to you. We do have about 10 minutes between now and wine, so I figure we can probably get about 3 questions in. Who has a question for our panel? Raise your hand, and we've got folks with mics who we'll start with our planning commissioner here.
Thank you for the presentations. I wanted to ask Patrice first, because I'm familiar with your Bella Riviera condominium complex for employees. And you mentioned that you're starting to ask yourselves internally what additional incentives might make sense for you to further invest in workforce housing, employee housing. And I'd be interested in hearing your ideas or your recommendations that you could feed back to local government to help incent you to do more of that, along with your colleagues who are also employers on the panel.
Well, thanks for that, and thanks for your support. We really appreciate that. So it was interesting today in preparing. You know, I have a confession. I don't know all of the 3,700 employees intimately, so I'm not really. It was funny when there was a question about what is the composition of your workforce? Who is it? The millennials who are the primary workforce, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers? And I said with emphasis, it's the baby boomers. No, it's the millennials. I should have known that because we've onboarded quite a few of them. And so there is, what I wonder if that's an urban legend, what I'm about to say, and that is that the millennials really are not looking for ownership. They really are, the mentality is, I want to be able to be free. I want to be able to rent so I can experience different types of jobs, and maybe I move more frequently.
And I can leave my employer with no notice. And
Yeah,
yes.
there you go. And so I started questioning that, and really then I started wondering, maybe we ought to be looking at rental. Maybe we ought to be looking at the high density and coming up with, don't say this too loud, but maybe mixed use, where there could be mixed use where you have medical during the day, outpatient services, and maybe something on upper floor. So we're kicking around some ideas, you know, and then it's a matter of where and what properties are available, et cetera. But that's kind of, those are some of the ideas that we're looking at.
Anyone else on this question?
Well, I just had a question for the room to take their temperature. I'm a Gen Xer, so not a millennial, but is it true that that's what they want?
Yeah, I'm curious about
so,
that. That's why I say it's a
So we'll
urban
take the
legend.
temperature in a second,
Okay,
but as
I
a
like
Gen
it.
Xer, what I can say is we wanted that precisely until the minute we were married and started to plan a family. And then what we wanted was diametrically opposed to what we had wanted before. And so the question is, can you have both, right? So is that really, is that sort of with nods and gestures, is that what millennials want? Is that what the new workforce, is that what's missing in Santa
Who's
Barbara?
a millennial in the room who can speak for your entire group? Oh, we have one right here. Just raise your hand.
Yeah.
Yes?
And do you think in 10 years you'll think the same? Okay, okay.
For those who didn't hear, she said that she would continue to do that as long as she didn't get married or have a family. So she'd be all for rental. We'll go all the way to the back here. Wow, a rarity.
Yeah, as a married millennial, I wanted to rent up until the exact second I got married and got a dog, and then I needed a house with a yard, and I didn't ever want to move again. So I don't know if it's just, I don't think it's part of being a millennial. I think it's part of being in your 20s. If you want a young
Yeah.
workforce, you're going to want people who rent, but then it turns out people get old. So then they're going to want to own a
What's
house.
up with that?
And so this isn't, it's not a millennial problem, it's just a getting old problem.
Well, and I also wondered, to your point, and it was said earlier, that we just need to have diverse choices for housing to reach all aspects of our population. Because I do think millennials might want to rent, but boy, my God, I have a 25-year-old adult, a child of adult age. And that child of adult age says that he doesn't want to rent, but boy, does our house seem comfortable to him. I'm just saying.
He
Does
doesn't
anyone
wanna
have an
rent.
eviction service that you can recommend to?
It's a difference between not wanting to rent and not wanting to pay rent. I think that's the challenge.
Well
there.
put, as always. Absolutely.
Let me chime in real quick.
Sure.
So the millennial thing is really interesting. I also looked at our workforce today and realized it's millennials managed by Xers with some boomers, and the boomers are the accounting department. That's the layout of the company. But I wonder if it really isn't millennials or Xers. It's the age that we're getting married is later, and we're having kids later, and so. It used to be a 24-year-old until you turn 25, 26. That was when you were hitting that age of like, oh, I need a yard for my dog or my future kid. And now that's happening at 30. And so we're saying, oh, it's this millennial generation. And instead, it's just a delay in terms of the years that they get to that point.
Of course, the other part of this I'm hearing too is maybe it's not just the family, maybe it's the dog. If we had more pet-friendly rentals, then we'd be good, right?
I think that's
issue.
true.
You're
I think
just-
that's
Business opportunity. You can let me know about that. Thank you. All right. Other questions? Other questions for our panel? We have met and exceeded all your needs, or you're all just wanting wine already? Oh, wait, we got one in the back here.
Some of the issues that are related to housing have to do with transportation or childcare. You've mentioned those, working hours, peak commute times. Addressing those or changing those to alleviate some of the congestion and problems we have with traffic, I think that could help, but it seems like we expect employers to do that all on their own. Maybe SBCAG could do something, or another agency, I don't know. Are there any ideas about having a more governmental agency help coordinate those types of things?
I can speak to this just a little bit. So my family's in development. They're currently working on Estancia. It's a new mixed-use kind of development up in La Cumbre area. And they're working with government agencies to see if they can have low-income housing available there. So they've actually have devised plans to actually accommodate 9 to 12 affordable housing in the area. So that's, I guess it's not hopeless, right? And then just recently moved into a new apartment complex up in La Cumbre called The Mark, right? Which is kind of going for the young professional type, or a family of two that wants to have a dog on the premise in a new kind of building. So I'm seeing the landscape of Santa Barbara change and pretty rapidly. So I know that's been kind of daunting and scary, like where is our housing? But it is coming, right? There's conversation of the Galleria being retrofitted into an apartment complex. There's conversations of downtown State Street, with the vacancies of all of the retail centers becoming homes. Housing, rentable units. So as the landscape is constantly changing through technology, through government partnerships, I don't think it's all hopeless here. But having.
Yeah, I would also echo that SBCAG does do some great things. We learned a lot from them. We partnered with them in creating our commuter benefits and they give us some great ideas in terms of van pools and carpools and matches for commuters, incentives. Could they do more? I'd love to have a rail system. Anybody with me on that one?
Yes.
I'd love to have a rail system. But, so yeah, I don't want to diminish the role of government, because I'm all in there. I just think we also have an accountability as community members and business owners to do that.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the objections you get with housing is like it's too big of a problem, we can't solve it, so let's just move on to something else, or not move on to anything else. Why? But so, yeah, you can't solve all the problems with just housing, but it's one piece of it. You can make an impact. So we're not trying to double the housing stock in Santa Barbara, but we can make an impact. And then the other thing that's equally as important, if not more, is the lane and the train that have both been taking a long, long time. Those are critical, critical things. So more housing, lane, train, we've got 20 years. We push the becoming Orange County and LA out another 20 years if we can do that, or maybe even 50 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving our panel a round of applause for their effort today.
Good job, Ken.
And before you all get up, let me reintroduce Craig Minus to send us off today.
Well, thank you, everyone. On behalf of the board, we have considered today a success. We hope you had a great time as well. Please join us for a wine reception following this program now. Please also look for our online survey, which should be coming out next week, and that will give you an opportunity to give us even more feedback on today's event. But again, thank you for your attendance. We've had a wonderful time, and we'll see you next year.